Hello, my name is Prairie Dawn. So today, I will be reading a book about Mr. Noisy by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Noisy was a very, very noisy person indeed. For example, if a Mr. Noisy is reading this story to you, he'd be shouting at the top of his voice, and the top of Mr. Noisy's voice is a very loud place indeed. You can even hear it 100 miles away. For example, when most people sneeze, you can hear him in the next room, but a tissue. When Mr. Noisy sneezes, you can hear him in the next country Bombay. You should pause. Now, this story starts that Mr. Noisy is asleep in bed, in his bedroom, in his house, which is on top of a hill. He was snoring, and as you can well imagine, when Mr. Noisy snores, that is a snore worth hearing. It sounds more like a herd of elephants than a snore. Then Mr. Noisy's alarm clock went off. Mr. Noisy's alarm clock sounds like no other alarm clock in the world. It sounds more like a fire engine. Mr. Noisy woke up, and so too did all the people who lived in Wobbletown, which is at the bottom of Mr. Noisy's hill. Later that day, Mr. Noisy decided that he had to go shopping. He went out of his house, shutting the door behind him. Bang! The door wobbled, the house wobbled, the whole hill wobbled, Wobbletown wobbled. Even a bird flying high above wobbled. And why can you not talk about egads? Then Mr. Noisy walked down the hill. Clump, clump, clump. He walked into the baker's shop. Crash went the door as he opened it. Bang went the door as he shut it. "I'd like a loaf of bread!" Boom, Mr. Noisy to Miss Crumb. The baker's wife, Mrs. Crumb, trembled and sold him a loaf. Oh no. Then Mr. Noisy walks along the street to butcher. Clop, clop, clop. He walked into the butcher's shop. Crash with the door as he opened it. Bang with the door as he shut it. "I'd like a piece of meat!" Boom, Mr. Noisy to Mr. Bacon, the butcher. Mr. Bacon trembled and sold him some meat. Egads, why could he talk about meat? What? God. I sick. Afterwards, Miss Crumb met Mr. Bacon on the street. "We really must do something about Mr. Noisy being so noisy," she said. "Absolutely," replied Mr. Bacon. "But what?" "I know," said Mrs. Crumb, and she whispered into Mr. Bacon's ear. Mr. Bacon smiled a small smile, which grew to a broad grin. "Mrs. Crumb," he said, "I think you have the answer to this question." "I have no idea. What's this question?" Following day, Mr. Noisy went shopping again. Clump, clump, clump. He went into Mrs. Crumb's shop. "I'd like a loaf of bread," he boomed. "Sorry, what did you say?" asked Mrs. Crumb, pretending not to hear. "I'd like a loaf of bread," Mr. Noisy exploded and shouted. "Sorry," said Mrs. Crumb, putting her hand to her ear. "Can you speak up, please?" "I'd like a loaf of bread," roared Mr. Noisy. "Can't hear you," replied Mrs. Crumb. Mr. Noisy gave up and went out. He's just like, best. Margaret McGillicuddy. Do not talk about Greg McGillicuddy. Peace out. Okay. Mr. Noisy went into Mr. Bacon's shop. "I'd like a piece of meat," he boomed. Mr. Bacon pretends not to notice. "I'd like a piece of meat," Mr. Noisy shouted. "Did you say something?" asked Mr. Bacon. "I said I'd like a piece of meat," roared Mr. Noisy. "Pardon," said Mr. Bacon. Mr. Noisy gave up and went out and went home and went to bed. Hungry, why would you do that? The day after, Mr. Noisy tried again. He went into Mrs. Crumb's shop. I like a loaf of bread, he boomed. A what? Asked Mrs. Crumb. Mr. Noisy started shouting very top his voice. A loaf of! And then he stopped. And then he thought. And he said quietly, I'd like a loaf of bread, please, Mrs. Crumb. Mrs. Crumb smiled. Certainly, she said. Then Mr. Noisy went into Mr. Bacon's shop. I like a piece of meat, he boomed. Did you say something? Asked Mr. Bacon. Yes, I did, shouted Mr. Noisy at the very top of his voice. I said I'd like a... And then he stopped. And then he thought. And he said quietly, I'd like a piece of meat, please, Mr. Bacon. And then Mr. Bacon smiled. My pleasure, he said. Okay. So carrying his bread and meat, Mr. Noisy set off home up the hill. Clump, clump, clump. And then he stopped, and then he thought, did you know what he did? He tiptoed. A tiptoe was something Mr. Noisy had never tried before. It was fun. Mr. Noisy arrived at his front door. He put out his hand to open the door, and then he stopped, and then he thought, and didn't you know what he did? He opened the door very quietly. He stepped inside. Then he shut the door very gently. Quietly and gently were two things Mr. Noisy had never tried before either. That was fun too. And do you know something? From then until now, Mr. Noisy isn't anything noisy like he used to be. And do you know something else? The people of Waffle Town are delighted, especially Mrs. Crumb and Mr. Bacon. And do you know something else? Mr. Noisy has learned how to whisper. You know what? I think this story might have a happy ending. I really love happy endings. And technically, I have bought weird things. I technically fixed Mr. Noisy's arm because his arm just and he's actually, I glued him back on. And technically, I do have something I left in the jewelry in my box. Oh, what a nice box. Is this a Nestle box? I want to open this. Oh, I don't know what it is. Oh, good. What are you doing there, Miss Chatterbox? I know you got me. I technically thought you would say you would positively just explode. And I make a new video coming soon this week. And technically, you should positively do not talk about Great McGillicuddy. Hey, yeah. Oh no, I think the bag is actually stinky. And I bought the bag and I just had bought the Care Bears and there. And technically, I should make a video of that soon or later. And actually, I technically would say that the Sesame Street bag belongs to the Live. And this bag, it goes with my Clay's friends. And you know what? It's cheap. It's Billy. See, it's empty grip. Okay, we stop thinking crazy. And not thinking crazy. Oh no, something's about to fall. I'd like a piece of it. Oh no, piece of a snickety. Okay, I'm just signing off. Yeah. This is brought to you by some kind of logo. And it's brought to It's brought to you by NIY, the owner of some good commercial for Prairie Dawn videos. And technically, it stinks.